So welcome everyone to another airworthiness webinar. Uh, this is airworthiness webinar number 8. As per always, everyone should be muted. Please raise your hand using the control panel and I'll unmute you to ask a question. You can use the chat box during the webinar and I'll respond to relevant chat at various intervals. Tonight I'll talk about some of the most recent changes to MOSP 3, some of the outcomes from the June Airworthiness panel meeting, which was last weekend. We have a guest speaker tonight, Steve Trone, who will be talking about FLARM performance testing. And as always, I'll be talking about the airworthiness aspects of recent incidents and some of the recent defects reports. Back in webinar number 7, which was the previous one, we discussed some of the changes that were made to comply with the Part 149. And we discussed the new management of change manual, which is admin 0028. These procedures are now being put into use. I have created a number of change proposals, which we've performed 2 and used MOSP 3 as a trial of these procedures and to use it as a training run for the executive committee. These 2 changes were recently published. This included a new section 18.8, which gives authority to fit LED strobes. These are the visual awareness lights. And this gives approval to fit them to the upper or lower centre fuselage doors, retractable engine doors, landing gear doors, on the wingtips. And that's very much on the empennage, not in the empennage. I'm well aware that there are some visual awareness lights that you can mount into the leading edge of the fin, but that's a major structural change. On top of the instrument panel and quite commonly on the inside of the forward part of the canopy. Since that change came out and in discussion with the soaring development panel last weekend, competitions will have this mandated from in Australia, will have this mandated from 2028, and they will only accept red or white strobes and the flash frequency to be between 40 and 100 flashes per minute. I will put another correction to MOSP 3 at the next revision. So MOSP 3 allows you any colour strobe. It allows you any flash rate. However, the competitions will be compliant with the IGC rules, and the IGC rules are mandating the red and white strobes and the flash frequency. So if you want your aircraft to be eligible for the nationals or have your aircraft hired out to an international pilot at the next Worlds in Australia, then you will be needing to have meet the requirements that the soaring development team have set. So it's the red or white strobes. I know there's some green ones out there, and the flash rate. Also change was approval for lithium ferrous phosphate batteries. Now, this was previously approved back in 2017, where we allowed the use of particular models of the Fusion brand LFP batteries to replace sealed lead acid batteries for instrument and avionics power. This is now at section 18.11. It is a rewrite of what was the previous section 18.10. It gives authority to replace sealed lead less acid batteries. Yeah, okay, thank you, Steve. If you can admit the people are still dribbling in, that'd be great. So previously under MTAR 2017, we approved the use of particular models of the Fusion LFP batteries to replace sealed lead acid batteries for the instruments and avionics. This is a new section now, 1811. It's a rewrite of the section 1810. It's because of the visual awareness lights has now changed section numbers. This allows any brand of LFP battery to replace a sealed lead acid battery for your avionics power, providing it meets one of the listed standards that's in section 1811. Now, IEC 62133-2 appears to be the most common. In order to fit these batteries, you must have the permission of the sailplane owner. Now, that is the registration holder. You must not have in-flight charging. You must not have any damage to the battery. If it's dropped, it must be removed from service. This is important. Damage to the battery is a significant risk factor. So if you're in the habit of placing your battery on top of the wing as you fit it or remove it, and you have the risk of it sliding off onto the ground, that's not a good habit to be in. And I would encourage people to change their habits. It's going to be a very expensive mistake if you drop some of these batteries and then have to ditch them. Now, the Daily Inspection Handbook has also been updated as part of this change. The benefits of the lithium ferrous phosphate batteries are pretty well publicised. They have a much higher energy density. You have either the same amp hours as your sealed lead acid battery for a lighter weight, which can give you greater cockpit weight. Alternatively, for the same weight, you can get much more amp hours out of the battery. The lithium ferrous phosphate chemistry was chosen because it has the highest temperature of any of these lithium batteries before a thermal runaway occurs. And when it does not produce a flame. However, the downside of lithium ferrous phosphate batteries is when it does have a runaway, it produces very large volumes of very toxic smoke. So the ops people, when they get to reviewing their GPC training units, will be updating the GPC training units for smoke in the cockpit scenario. This is not entirely risk-free. One of the potential problems out there is if you have a mixed operation with sealed lead acid batteries and lithium ferrous phosphate batteries, is people plugging the batteries into the wrong charger. Lithium batteries are quite sensitive to discharge and charging temperatures if it's too cold or too hot. And I'm very aware that many clubs will have hangars which are essentially tin sheds, and in summer the interior of those sheds will be very, very hot. So charging of lithium batteries under those much higher temperatures is going to be a risk. Hopefully, by having a battery that complies with one of these standards, the battery management system built into the battery will cut the battery out if it gets too warm. Each year, we have an airworthiness panel meeting. This is where we get all of the regional managers of airworthiness together, along with Dennis, the executive, and myself, the deputy chairs. And we have a face-to-face meeting. This is normally in Melbourne at West Meadows. Now, we don't normally advertise it, but if you're interested in coming along to one of those meetings, if you're keen enough to come along, we're keen enough to have you there. This year, we had a member from Southern Cross and a member from the Gliding Club Victoria attend. Previously, we've had people like Roger Druce and others who have quite keen on airworthiness attending, even though they have no formal role in the airworthiness panel. In brief on the outcomes, we ran through new processes to fit in with the changes to the airworthiness training system that were introduced during Part 149. We've had to update parts of the IT system to accommodate the changes that were introduced. As I said last time, the regional managers can extend and revalidate existing airworthiness authorisations. The big change is only Dennis, the executive manager, airworthiness, can approve new airworthiness authorisations. So we've got a new window there in the IT system such that the RMAs, if they have run a course, can enter the person's details, click on a button, and that will then send a request to Dennis to approve the rating. Also coming out of it, we have a new revalidation package being developed. It's going to incorporate some of the outcomes from the recent trends and incidents that we've noticed along the way. This package is being developed now, and we're going to be reviewing it in July, and it should be available in early August. That's so that we don't have the people getting bored by having the same package being delivered year in, year out. The package is a live event, and we'll be changing it every couple of years. Over the COVID years, with restricted movement around the states, the airworthiness audits, which happen every 2 years, got seriously out of control. We had an enormous backlog develop, and the RMAs had been working very hard at trying to regain this under control. Dennis Stacey has been managing this, and it's a big well done to the team for getting what they have done over the last 12 months. And I think now at present, where the number of outstanding audits is even better than what I would call the normal backlog. We typically run about 12, be behind about 12 audits around this time of the year. And we're down below 10 now. We're into about 7 remaining. However, one of the things that's come out of some of the audits is recurring maintenance is being missed. The first inspection is being performed and signed out in the maintenance release. However, a new entry is not being raised for the subsequent inspection and maintenance. So in my example page on the right-hand side of the maintenance release here, you'll see there's an entry to lubricate the hotelier connections every 50 hours as item 1. It was due at 3,150 hours. It's been signed out, and it was completed when the aircraft had rolled over 3,148. And it appears a lot of clubs are making the mistake of then not entering a new line at item 2, which would again be lubricate the hotelier connections. And it'd be 50 hours since the inspection was done. So if you notice that there was 3,148, the next one is due at 3,198 hours. So by missing that second line or subsequent lines, clubs were operating aircraft well in excess of the recurring maintenance, and they're missing out on that. So when you do have maintenance releases with recurring maintenance entries, you need to fill in a new line when you sign out the last item. We also ran through the airworthiness budget. Unfortunately, the airworthiness expenses have increased, and the prices have to be increased to reflect this. There's always quite an argument between myself and the Treasurer when we get around to doing budgets. I'm very reluctant to increase the prices unnecessarily. The chart on the right-hand side largely shows what's the everyday or running system costs that are directly accounted to the airworthiness panel. What it doesn't show is the component cost of the insurance to cover volunteer airworthiness members. Tanya and Fiona, the office ladies, do a huge amount of airworthiness work, and it does not reflect the portion of their time that's involved in airworthiness with aircraft registration and the Form 2 returns. It doesn't show the cost of the IT licenses that we use for airworthiness work as well. Now, in previous years, circa 2017, 2016, we had some one-off projects that were reflected in the airworthiness expenses. These days, these are treated separately. So last year we had the electric propulsion training, a whole stack of historical airworthiness documents that were converted from paper copy into electronic copy, which is the office scanning, and etc. That's accounted for separately. It's not shown in that chart. What you will see is that around 80% of our income is from the annual inspection kit income, and that's still trending fairly consistently. Our costs have ramped up in the last few years. However, I am confident that it's well worth the spend, and it's being reinvested back into airworthiness. The chart on the bottom is just a map of the number of annual inspection kits we sell. This is by calendar year. We have a bit of a low point in 2020, which is when COVID first hit. However, we've consistently sold over the last 6 or 7 years there around 730 annual inspection kits each year. So that's my metric at the moment of how many aircraft we have in service in the country at the moment. So quite pleasingly, it's recovering nicely from 2020, and I expect that we'll probably get up to 740 this year and have a slow trend increasing. A question I get asked all the time is, when are airworthiness courses being run? Now, the airworthiness courses are being organised by, excuse me, the regional airworthiness managers, the RMAs. This is a list of what they've got planned at the moment. Now, I don't have fixed dates or locations for a number of these courses at the moment. However, this is the most up-to-date information I have. You will notice that almost all the regions except for Western Australia are starting to run weight and balance training. There's a course being organised in Victoria, Queensland, South Australia and New South Wales. I've volunteered my time to help out with the instructing on the South Australia, the Victorian and the Queensland courses. I will point out these will be the first courses run in weight and balance since we have received the weight and balance approval from CASA. And I'll update this when I get further information from the RAs. As the dates and locations are confirmed, they'll be placed onto the GFA calendar. So if you go to the website, click on calendar, and they should all appear there. If you have any questions about courses, or if you're interested in a particular course, please let your regional manager of airworthiness know. They're not likely to organise a course unless they feel that there is a need for the course. So most of these weight and balance courses have come about somewhat spontaneously and independently at these regions, because people have started to ask for the courses, and the RMAs feel there's enough need there to run the training. Competition marks. This was a lively discussion. It took a fair bit longer than what I expected. I'd had some pre-discussions with Craig Vinall, the chair of the Soaring Development Panel, and we thought we had it sorted. Obviously, we didn't, because we then had a further 1 hour discussion in a joint panel meeting between the Airworthiness and Soaring Development panels. MOSP 3, Section 410, has previously dictated the rules on competition marks. This got a little out of sync with the version of MOSP 3 that was approved for Part 149. I had previously given CASA an older version of MOSP 3 to approve for Part 149. Then I'd gone through and made some changes to version 9. CASA had finally got back with some comments on MOSP 3, and I did not successfully roll in all the other changes that I made into the version that was finally approved by CASA. So the problem we see at the moment is there are sailplanes kicking around the place where, let's say, the competition marks are more a form of tail art, I think was the best description we came up with. So we had a discussion on what competition marks were really for and how they were going to be used. The outcome was we will change Section 410 and MOSP 3 to reflect the requirements of CASAR Part 45. Now, CASAR Part 45 is the regulation around national markings. The CASA Part 45 also says you can more or less paint the aircraft what you want. provided you do not go and confuse the nationality or registration marks on the aircraft. So if you want to have some fancy tail art on your airplane, that's fine by the airworthiness people providing. You don't go and obscure or confuse the nationality or the registration. So that's nationality is the VH, the registration is the 3 other letters. MOSP 4 will have the IGC requirements so for competition marks. So this will be along the lines of all letters and numbers have a minimum height of 300 millimeters and they all must be the same size. Now, I'm aware of at least one aircraft getting around where there's 2 very large letters and 1 very small letter. That won't be allowed into the national competitions. All the letters must be of the single colour and it must contrast strongly with the sailplane finish. Now, I'm also aware that there's some tail art out there where it's multicoloured. That's probably not going to get into the nationals either. The contrast strongly is a direct quote from the IGC requirements. You'll have to understand that there was a bit of fuss at the last Worlds where the contrast of some competition marks on the fin were contested. Have a plain block font that is easily legible from a distance. Now, I'm also aware that there's at least a couple of aircraft out there with, charitably say, competition marks that are more tail art with some fairly fancy fonts out there. The plain block font is, again, a straight quote from the IGC requirements. Arial, an Arial bold kind of font would be considered a plain block font. So that gives some reasonable delineation. MOSP 3 is going to be worried about the CASAR requirements. MOSP 4 is going to be worried about competitions. If you're not going to be involved in the national level competitions or competitions full stop, you can have whatever you want on the tailplane in terms of artistic license. However, don't get upset when the scrutineers come past if you're trying to get into the nationals or hire your aircraft out at a Worlds event. If they start coming down with, here's are the rules, why don't you comply? FLARM performance testing. There's been a lot of discussion over FLARM performance testing in recent weeks for a number of reasons. At the moment, we have 605 FLARMs listed in the country. Now, I know that there are a couple of OGN sites that were offline, and so whatever FLARMs are at those airfields were probably not listed in this. So the number of FLARMs in Australia may be higher than 605. There were 37 readily identifiable tugs that were listed with FLARM. There were 432 identifiable sailplanes, but there was 112 FLARMs that do not have any registration listed in them or model data. So that brings the total up to 544. Now, the astute or the very mathematically gifted can add up some of those numbers and say, Anthony, that's not 605. And it was a pleasant surprise to see that there's a number of GA aircraft kicking around with FLARM fitted and a number of RAOS aircraft kicking around with FLARMs fitted as well. So out of the 730 sailplanes currently operating in Australia, I'll also point out there are a number of overseas sailplanes that were listed on these FLARMs. I've not counted those as being Australian. So out of the 730 sailplanes in Australia that are currently operating, we've got around 60% at least with confirmed to have a FLARM. Now, if all those 112 unknowns are in fact sailplanes and not tugs or power planes or something else, that will bring up the number to 76%. So we've got reasonable FLARM coverage out there. which is a nice little segue for our guest speaker, Steve Trone. Steve has over 40 years of flying with over a range of different activities, including hang gliding, GA, light sports aircraft. He currently has the good fortune to fly a Mini Nimbus. He has been credited with installing the first OGN in Australia back in 2012 and has installed the OGN network in Victoria. So I'm going to see if I can hand over to Steve and he can take over and I'll stop sharing, hopefully. And it's over to you, Steve.
Well, thanks, Anthony. Hopefully I'm coming through okay for everybody. And I'll just bring up the PowerPoint. Hopefully everybody can see that okay, can they?
I'll just give a thumbs up to see if you can get, yep, there's some thumbs up there. Great, thanks guys.
Cool, so I just want to give it's a quick 15-minute presentation on another tool we can use to check FLARM. While this is airworthiness, we could actually say FLARM performance, but it's all related to safety, so it crosses over into operations as well as the airworthiness side. Usually in this presentation, I run a little video that's worthwhile watching, but I'm not going to do that and bore you. I would encourage you all to actually have a watch of the video. It's been developed by the UK CAA, and it goes into FLARM and all the other flavours of flight alerting systems out there, but also their use in the circuits and how they could be used in the circuit and the distractions that come about them. It's very worthwhile doing. The tool that I'm going to talk to is really about FLARM range. It's very similar to K-Trax. And in some of the other presentations I do actually run through a couple of IGC traces of close calls or close proximities. So a couple of fast facts. It's actually nearly 20 years since the first FLARM came out. And nearly 20 years since I got my first AusFLARM. I was in one of the beta groups for that because I could see the importance of it. Australia was a bit of an early adopter. We'll get our AusFLARMs going. And according to the FLARM site yesterday, it actually said there were 60,000 FLARM devices worldwide. When I had a look the other month, earlier in the year, it was only 30,000. So who knows if that's marketing or not. About half of them are actually manufactured by FLARM, and the remainder is sort of under license. So LX and all them, they actually pay a license fee to FLARM themselves to actually use their algorithms in their systems. Importantly, in FLARMs, there's two components to a FLARM, and this is really important in Australia due to the AusFLARM. There's a transmit side and there's a receive side. AusFLARMs, when they first came out, they ran really well, but after a few years they actually found the receive side of the circuit would fail and they would only transmit. And I remember many conversations at Horsham Week back in the late 26/7 or so, where people at the bar would say, this guy flew straight past my nose and my FLARM didn't go off. Well, the aircraft that went past was probably transmitting, but it's highly likely that the AusFLARM that you had, the receive side of the circuit had gone, you weren't receiving. And the only way it would receive is the poor guy actually came through your cockpit. So right now, the FLARM site, you download an IGC file or a file out of your FLARM device and you pump that into the FLARM website, and that'll give you a bit of a range indication of what it's like. That's testing the receive range of the device. That's an important note. And you'll get a funky bit of a range thing happening there. This one's actually for my own aircraft. It's way good out to the left, but it's actually, my aircraft has a FLARM antenna in the tail, and I strongly suspect the counterweight and the rudder actually impacts the range out to the right. But granted, it's 7 kilometres. Personally, I'm not overly concerned. The other site that we've been encouraging people to use is the K-Trax website. So this website actually uses the data that's received by the OGN stations on the ground to actually build up a picture. So it uses basically the lat and long of where the station is, and then also the lat and long of where the aircraft is and transmitting, and does some funky calculations in the background to give you a bit of a map. And again, this shows it's my aircraft. You can see sort of, yeah, bottom right-hand corner is not too good. Mind you, the chances of someone trying to catch up to you from the bottom right-hand corner probably aren't that good either. So personally, I think that's acceptable. It's important to note that the K-Trax site stores about 3 months worth of data. So if you're the glider or the aircraft you actually want to test your FLARM hasn't flown for 3 months or so, there's not been much data, if any, there on the site. This brings us to the this newer site. It holds about 3 months worth of data. More interestingly, it's a consolidated view from an aerodrome. And I'll drop into the detail of these pages in the next couple of slides. So instead of just putting loading your data up into the FLARM site, getting a view of yourself, looking at the K-Trax website, you get a bit of an idea of an average of the world. This will actually give you a lot more information. And you can actually compare yourselves to other aircraft that are actually running out there around the place. It also provides a bit more information on the registration of your FLARM on the LX sites and a number of other sites that are running around out there. So yeah, got a big page, a lot of information. I could sit here and go through every field there is there for the next half hour and bore you to tears. Sadly, I'd probably be more bored than yourselves. So I'm just going to focus on how I use this website to help me when I look at things, which is the important thing, and hopefully be able to take something away. So in the top left-hand corner, there's a little question mark. This gives you a bit of a description of all the fields. If you're really keen and interested and you're curious what the field is, please jump onto that site and have a read. This product, a gentleman in Germany, Constantine, began developing this during COVID because he was a bit bored, he couldn't get to the airfield. And from that, working with him, we've actually added a bunch of other fields and things, and it's sort of still going on a bit of development. Oh, there's a red circle for the correct exclamation mark if you want to get details of what the fields are. So we jump into the detail. Pretty self-explanatory, gives you the rego or the ID number of the FLARM you're in, the registration of the aircraft, the model number, and the last time it flew. This is important, especially if you're looking at dates when FLARM versions are ending and finishing, whether the aircraft's parked up, it's been laid up, it's sitting in someone's trailer or the such. The other one, which I actually always look at first, is the FLARM software version number and the date that actually version of software expires. Not as important as it was 6 months or 12 months ago, because now there is no expiry for the new versions of software that are being loaded. More interestingly, during the Worlds, we ran this 2 or 3 weeks prior to the Worlds, and I think 2/3 of the aircraft that were actually at the Worlds either had a FLARM that wasn't working at all, the software had expired, or was going to expire during the competition. And by feeding this information back over the space of a week or two, we actually got the vast majority of FLARMs updated and running. I think in the end there was probably half a dozen or so, or a dozen that weren't. Across the top, the next one I generally look at is the quality of the FLARM, and that's the signal that's actually coming out. Constantine's done a really good job of sort of trying to grade them with a bit of a traffic light. If it's green, it means you've got an average compared to all the FLARMs around the rest of the world. Statistically, you'd probably be saying that it's 60,000. I still have issues with that number, but a good 10, 20, 30,000 worth. If that percentage is red, you want to really go out and have an urgent look at your FLARM. What we've found historically is that people had a FLARM, they thought it was in there, the light flashed green, they thought the world was good, but it really quickly came to light that while the light might be flashing, doesn't mean it's actually transmitting, and transmitting well mightn't have good range. So if you have you've got a red percentage there, really jump out and actually have a look at that FLARM, and 99% of all the issues are actually with the antenna. More importantly, if it's an Oz FLARM and you're doing maintenance for the glider that has an Oz FLARM, do that RX check on the FLARM website, as well as this one, because you may actually find that the receive side's failed. Most of the FLARMs I've heard of, they've all had the receive side fail. There's very, very few original ones that actually still work on the receive side. I do know one or two that have had the receive side of that circuit replaced 3 or 4 times, or they've cannibalized multiple other FLARMs to try and build up new ones.
I'll just jump
Yeah,
in
if
for a minute,
you're,
Steve.
yeah.
With that FLARM or FLR quality number, I have been perusing different sites of different aircraft. It does seem that the website likes to have a reasonable amount of FLARM transmit data. Being winter, a lot of aircraft aren't flying that much. So there's quite a few there with some fairly poor quality numbers. But I suspect in summer, once people start doing more flying and getting further away from the airfield, we'll see those numbers improve. This web page does seem to like getting quite a few flights there to build up a picture of the information.
Yeah, that's a really important point. During the summer just gone, I would have said most of the sites I looked at or airfields I looked at were reasonably good, but if you look at them now, they do drop off a fair chunk, especially like Bacchus Marsh. More interestingly, this site isn't about saying, hey, Nancy, your glider, you're at 41%, mine's at 45. Hey, mine's better, you better go pull your finger out and do something else. It's not about that. It's about triggering the conversations to try and resolve issues, especially if you're getting the red and the yellow ones and having those conversations. I did some work with an owner of an ASW20 up in Tokemall. They mounted a new antenna to get it ready for the Worlds and all that, put it in a great spot, did a range test, and it was 1.5 kilometres. When we actually pulled the cover off, they had an aluminium bracket to hold the base of the antenna and a few other things. Once we removed those aluminium brackets and raised the antenna, the thing popped up to about 20 kilometres. It was just fine little things like that. If you're getting the yellow signals, yep, have a look, keep it in the back of your mind, and then have a fiddle with the location of where those antennas are. Some of the tugs, when you actually look at them, don't have uniform radiation patterns. That's probably also because of where the antennas mounted. Some of them actually in the dashboard, so you get shadows off the metal framework and things that are there.
Yeah, I'll echo those comments. As airworthiness people, as an airworthiness person, you are not expected to run the testing. We're looking at putting together a series of notes out of all this, such that the operators, the pilots, over summer, go and do this kind of testing and looking at the performance of their FLARMs. And if they find that they're having problems, then they come and talk to the airworthiness people saying, help, I need to find a fix for this. So it's intending to be a trigger or at the start of the conversation.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Before we had some of these tools, people would see the green light, it's running, it's blinking, hey, they didn't know any better. And yeah, they just wouldn't know that. With this tool, any owner could jump in, have a look at the traffic lights percentages, get a bit of a smiley face when things are running right, and they got a pretty good idea, and they'll know whether to ask questions or not. Now, off to the left-hand side, where we've got the IDs of the aircraft, they're all links. If we actually jump through those links, we actually get another page. This has a little bit more information on it. So on the left side, there's what they call visibility. Is the aircraft registered in the OGN database so it can display properly? Is there a dual registration for the same FLARM? Because we know FLARMs move between aircraft, and it checks all those things for you. It also goes through, lists the version number in a bit more detail, the ICAO address, and also original serial numbers for the FLARMs. Then more importantly, on the right-hand side, it has those graphs like we actually saw in the K-tracks. The far right-hand graph, you'll see be across through that. That's the potential range based on the power that the FLARM should be transmitting. I've had many a discussion with the builder of the website of the usefulness of that, because in reality, all FLARMs should be able to get 200 or 300 or 400 kilometers. So I'm sort of focusing on the graph on the left to say, well, hey, that's what we're seeing. So with this aircraft, we're actually seeing that, hey, it's getting super performance, especially from this Rock 1 OGN site. And what we can actually do is we can click on any of those sites at the top and it'll remove them from the graph. The OGN site, the Rock, is a bit of an anomaly. The antenna the guy uses is a ham radio operator. It's the size of a small car on top of a mast up near the rock. It's got motors to spin the thing around and all sorts of stuff. So when we see really strong signals from that, we sort of take it with a grain of salt. Great for weapons, saving people time.
What sort of dB gains that antenna got, Steve?
I'm going to pluck 20.
Okay, so
It's
normally on a
serious.
OGN receiver, you've probably got about a 6 dB gain antenna, that kind of size. With a very large antenna like that, the reception strength that is going to be shown on these charts is quite a bit more. I will point out, if you want to use the K-Track site, on the slide that Steve's got there, you'll see the address, which is the 6 alphanumerics. That's the address you put into the K-Track site. The link that Steve clicked on to get there is a 9 alphanumeric number. It's got, I think, ICA at the front of it. You only use the last 6 alphanumerics into the K-Track site. You drop the ICA off the front of that address and it will work.
Thanks, Anthony. That's just a more detailed view of what that rose graph looks like. So any one of those stations up the top, you can click on them and they'll be removed out of that picture for you, so you can narrow down and get a better view of what's going on. More pertinent when you don't have the picture with the rock sitting in there. Now, Anthony suggested today that we actually show an aircraft, what it looks like on K-Tracks when we put it up, but then also in the OGN monitoring. And that's what this site does. Interesting, I think this is a tug up at Darling Downs, SWR. K-Track shows good. It's got a good visual thing out the front with that big pointy bit of the blue. It's worthwhile having, especially if it's the direction you're going. Where that graph goes up and down a bit through those green lines, it says to me that, yeah, something we could do better. There's probably an obstruction or a shadow from something to the antenna. Interestingly, if you go over to the OGN side and actually have a look at that, and even though I was saying ignore the potential range, the far right-hand one with the orange, that says to me there probably is more of a shadow from something somewhere. So while the range is probably okay, might be something worthwhile looking at over the next 12 months. Interestingly, though, the graph on the left is a little orange dot, and because it's a tug, it never gets more than a couple of kilometres from the aerodrome, hence the range ain't right. I have found with the MFG tugs that when they're doing ferries, that's a good time to actually have a look, because they generally go past a couple of OGN stations and you actually get a good view of what's going on with it.
Yeah, I picked this tug for a reason. It's obviously it's a tug. It only does flights within close proximity to the airfield. You can see on K-Tracks that it's got a very strong reception within very close range to the airfield. It's obviously doing a lot of flights in that area. There's a lot of good data there. The long range data is actually being picked up by a second OGN station further away from the airfield. And I believe it doesn't have direct line of sight when the tug's down low. So the probably been obscured by a range of hills or some trees or something like that. So the long range data is very sketchy because of that. But as Steve pointed out to me today, there does appear to be a shadow of some description there, a bit of directionality where it's getting good transmission in one direction, but not necessarily all the directions.
Correct, and that it falls back to this data of information is here to trigger a conversation with knowledgeable people. If you ever have questions or anything, I am open. I'll drop my email at the end. Please drop us a note, and yeah, I'll try and help you out where I can. Now, if you're actually checking the FLARM in your aircraft, this is actually a really good site to do it on. I'll just zoom in on that little box up in the upper right-hand corner. And that little box has the dB or the signal strength. So when you're sitting on the ground and you're towing your glider past the OGN station or something, I would look at that. You know, seeing 30, mid-30s, even 40 dB when you're at the bottom, it's quite normal. Out in the airfield, 20, high 20s, and even within a K or two, 20 dB is actually pretty good. that'll gives you a bit of a tool or a way to test what your FLARM's doing while you're on the ground, as opposed to making a change, going for a fly for a couple of hours, coming back and testing. The next picture, I'm sure most of you have probably seen before, is the do's and don'ts of antenna installation. These are just ripped straight from the FLARM install manuals. The very top left-hand one, where it has that dipole antenna, while it's really good and neat and tidy to bend that cable down and wrap it around, it actually does impact the range a fair bit. You really need to have that going out in a like in a big H, so to speak. The other ones showed bent or twisted or angled antennas. Obviously, they need to be vertically polarized, and you don't want them near obviously metal stuff and carbon fiber and all the other things, dashboards, other electronics, or mounted near GPS antennas can actually have a large impact.
We did have a aircraft at a South Australian airworthiness course not so long ago, where the antenna was literally strapped to the side of the Vario, I think it was, big aluminium box. The one to watch on that picture on the top left there, the bending of the coax very tightly around a tight radius actually ends up damaging the coax. It won't handle the very tight bend radii.
That's correct. Obviously, there's all sorts of mounting issues with low canopies on top of control panels. There's all sorts of issues in there, but you got to try and avoid them as best you can. So really, the takeaway from this is check the FLARM performance. Do your FLARM website, use the OGN one. Do a check during Christmas time when they're flying a lot. If you see somebody you know that has a poor FLARM performance, or the software's going out, just let them know. Drop them an email, give them a call or something or other. They probably don't know whatsoever. There was an example of pilot at the Nationals whose FLARM software was going to stop on the very last day of the comp. He had actually updated it and thought it was updated, and all the information from the computer said it was, but it actually wasn't. So yeah, he was actually welcomed that. If you have an OzFLARM, or you see an OzFLARM, just be extra vigilant, especially test that RX site using the FLARM website. And 99% of FLARM performance is all related to antennas and its poor location and position. Unless you're an RF engineer, it's not something people would actually think up or do. If you're flying competitions, this is actually a really good page. While people entering competitions need to present a range analysis of their FLARM, the timing of where that can come from is all over the place. Things can move, things can change. You can actually jump on the website each day and actually have a look and pick up aircraft that aren't quite right and do a sanity check, as opposed to filing through 30 or 40 pages of FLARM range to see what's going on. You can look at it as a whatever. And many thanks to Constantine, who actually wrote this thing. I know it's taken him a year and a half on and off, but yeah, many thanks. If you see the name or bump into him somewhere, especially if you're going to Europe for next winter to go flying like we all do, yeah, say hello. And these are the bunch of links. I'll paste them in the chat, and people can use them. If not, we'll email them out. After this, I can hang around after this meeting if people want to have a more in-depth discussion, so we don't have to bore the other 85 people that are in the chat.
That's all right. We'll take a quick pause. Thank you very much, Steve. That was great. Are there any immediate questions? If you want to stick your hand up. Give people a little bit of time here to work out where the hand button is. I think Greg Newbold. Let's see. Allow Mike. Greg, do you want to have a chat? You might need to unmute yourself, Brooke.
Oh, I have control.
Yes, you have control.
Yes, I noticed
your mic.
that an ad on some website, somebody was looking for an OGN transmitter vendor. Can you provide any information on how OGN transmitters are potentially being considered, rolled out? Is that a European thing? Is that coming here? And that I also understand that UDI is capable of displaying OGN traffic. Is that an Australian functionality?
So the they call them OGN trackers. And basically what they do is they don't do collision avoidance. They just transmit your position and the OGN stations pick them up. If you're really keen, you can build one for about $20. You buy the parts, you just got to program the thing, put it away. I think there's a couple of people in Europe that are actually building them. The thing just to be careful of is the frequency that they use in Europe is different to the frequency here. So both Europe and Australia, the frequency band they use is for all your portable phones we used to have around the house and all sorts of other stuff that works in there. But yeah, if you look on the OGN wiki site, there's actually step-by-step instructions on how to build one. I've got one that I use in the car when we put up OGN stations. That works well. The other question about UDIs, and yes, so I believe the UDIs are picking up the GPS signal from the phone or whatever device you have, transmitting it via the mobile network to the OGN servers, and it's being picked up from there. So Flight Radar 24 and all those places, they actually take output from the OGN servers. So if it gets in via that, then the UDI and the FLARM stuff will get in. Hopefully that makes sense.
There's a question from Mike. Doesn't the FLARM unit automatically upload the most recent version on the USB stick?
All FLARMs are equal, but they're not. If it's the early ones, you got to plug them into computers and things like that. The more recent ones, yes, depending on your model, if you put the latest firmware on it, most of them, for simplistic sake, when you plug it in, actually do the upload. That example I gave of the Nationals and the pilot, he actually done that, but it actually hadn't done the upload. So I think that was a bit of an anomaly, but yes, you would expect so. There are the odd, I have come across the odd issue with the new LX9000s and other things, but they're very, very rare. Like they're so rare, they're silly. And it's actually been the LX or the manufacturers that have actually had to look into it and release new firmware for their devices to fix them. They're just little bugs and things.
Brad, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask a question.
Yeah, I have just a sort of a general question. With CASA mandating transponders with ADS-B out, is FLARM going to become irrelevant?
I'll give you my take. If you want to flying as a Class C airspace, you have to have a Mode C, Mode S. So I can't go into Wave over Melbourne like I want to because I can't get hold of a transponder. ADS-B and all that is great, but in layman's terms, the ADS-B and Mode C transmit where you were. FLARM transmits where you're going to be. That's how it does the collision avoidance. And jets, they go up and down a bit, straight lines and all that. We're turning all over the place. So the algorithms between both of them are very, very different. They're there for very, very different things. That's my opinion.
It's an interesting question, Fred, and it's not possible for us to really answer it definitively because it, of course, is a CASA Air Services kind of question. There's a fair bit of work going into electronic conspicuity at the moment, particularly in Europe. There's a lot of discussion around the next branch of ADS, which is ADS-L. We're partway there at the moment. As Steve was saying before, if you have a FLARM unit and it's being received by an OGN receiver, that's being dumped onto the internet and it's being picked up by things like Oz Runway and stuff like that. So your position is being reported. How the authorities choose to use that is a different question. It's something that the authorities are going to have to resolve. There was at the safety meeting in Brisbane a month or so ago, of course, electronic conspicuity is a hot topic there after the two mid-air collisions. The CASA were very, very, very aware after that meeting about what people's thoughts were on ADS-B. Look at it that way.
Yeah, I know, like living in the Newcastle area, our stuff is more around being conspicuous to loyal wingmen. So RAF drones, and that's the reason for the enthusiasm from CASA around conspicuity.
And there are a bunch of others. There's OGN, and there's 3 or 4 other protocols they're using in Europe that sort of grew legs out of paragliding and hang gliding, which I think the OGN stations now, we receive one of them. I can't remember which one it is, but we're actually receiving and retransmitting that back to the OGN servers. Flight radar and some of the your flight bag devices, they actually also pick up from the OGN servers traffic. And I had an experience last summer where I had to fly along out the back of Hay somewhere at 8,000 feet, cruising at 100 knots, and I had this thing rapidly screaming up behind me, and it was going to be at the same level, same height at the same time. And I turned and I couldn't see it, and then about a minute later, I heard this noise, and there was a bonanza doing this big arc around me with all these people waving out the window. And talking to him later, he actually knew I was there because I was popping up on his flight device on his iPad or something.
Yeah, if you're on FLARM and you're within the range of an OGN, you will pick up on Oz runways, apparently.
Yeah.
Fred, if you can just put your hand down or stop me getting confused. All right, any other questions for Steve? Well, thanks, Steve. That was great. I'll talk to you later about trying to get a set of notes put together for and maybe a how-to guide or some basic things like that. My intention at the moment is we will move FLARM out of avionics in BSc and make it its own standalone chapter, and we'll try and build some of this into BSc in the not too distant future. Just let me rearrange my screen here because it's okay. We should be back on. Positions vacant. Rob Hambry stepped down from being one of the deputies in March. Now, Rob was a former chair. He was instrumental in the rewrite of MOSP 3 circa 2015, 2016 timeframe and getting it through CASA. And as always, I'd like to really show my appreciation for Rob for his continual support and the enormous contribution he's made to airworthiness over the years. If you're interested in volunteering for the deputy chair position, the description can be found in the position description manual on the Gliding Australia website under the admin docs. And for the bad news, I became chair of airworthiness in November 2019, so I'll have done my 5 years in the role this November, and I'll be stepping down at that time. It's been a fairly intense 5 years, and I need a break. So once again, if you're interested in volunteering to be the chair of airworthiness, please contact me or Doug Flocker, the CEO. The position description can be found in the very same position descriptions manual on the website. So I don't have an identified replacement at the moment, so both positions are currently open. If you're interested in volunteering and helping out with the administration of airworthiness, please let me know. On to incidents and defects. Again, this is all from the SOAR database or the defect reports on database, and it's all the information that I have at present. Now, I've copied the same slide from last time where I've tried to group things together. I think due to the time frame, I've just put it into calendar time this time rather than grouping things by type or topic. As always, it's not the purpose of an incident investigation to apportion blame or liability. The sole objective is to prevent accidents and incidents happening in the future. We have a no blame culture. Any action that we implement after an accident or incident is with the intent of preventing reoccurrence. We don't do punishment under this system. So first off, the very obvious elephant in the room, we had the GROB 109B, which was a flight into terrain and regrettably a double fatality on the 19th of April 2024. This was an impact during the flight to spread the ashes of a former club member. Now, the report for this is in draft at the moment. it has not been published. I've got to put a few edits in there for my contribution over the next few days. So at the present time, there are no airworthiness items that have been identified in the cause of the crash or the effect on the survivability. However, we've come across a number of airworthiness concerns during the investigation, and we will be dealing with those in the coming months, and I'll probably talk about them in the November webinar. Depending on how things go, there might even be a bespoke webinar for this particular event. Back from December last year, this was pretty hot very fresh when I did the last webinar. I've completed the defect report on that one. During the daily inspection, the pilot found there was excess lateral free play, so inboard, outboard, in the tailplane attachment drive. When it was subsequently de-rigged and dismantled, the cross tube had failed completely. I was told in situ the failure looked like only the surface finish was cracked. When I did the investigation, I did actually do a dye penetrant on this with fluorescent dye penetrant, and there are further cracks radiating out from the other adjustment hole on the right-hand side. What was particularly evident about the side that broke was there was a reasonably large tension fracture on the rear face. The conclusion I came to was when they fit this to the tailplane, there's a spacer on either side of the bolt that goes into the bearings. They are fitted to the aircraft such that there is no free play when that fitting is put in. At some stage that space has been lost or mislaid, and a washer or something like that has been substituted that wasn't thick enough, such that there was some free play to that bracket, and that free play was taken up when the bolts were torqued up. So the bolts ended up putting a lot of tension and bending on that aft face of the tube. So the cracks are a known failure. However, the additional tension and bending, which actually caused it to A, crack quite fast, and B, then snap. It was also possible that the bush on the port side was tighter than the starboard bush, so that pin on the and that bush and end of that torque tube was attracting more load. And then that was accelerating the fatigue on that side of the crossbar. A DI problem. This was a Jantar Junior from December last year, where a safety pin was not fitted to the main pin. This was during a flying camp. During a daily inspection, it was noticed that although the main pin, what they call the retainer, was installed correctly. Now, the main pin has a sliding T-bar handle. When you fit this, you need to have that handle vertical so that it then drops down into a hole in the parcel shelf. They refer to that as the retainer. So whilst it was installed correctly in the hole, the safety pin, which is shown there on the photo on the right-hand side, was not inserted to keep that retainer in place or stop the handle from rising up out of that hole. The safety pin was subsequently located in the large pocket behind the pilot's seat. Now, when they checked the maintenance release, it was found that the independent inspection after rigging the sailplane had not been performed, and that there'd been several DIs. This aircraft had flown several days at the camp, and it had been several DIs before they realised that the safety pin and the main pin was not fitted. The quality of daily inspection is still a ongoing topic for those who come to the safety seminar in their region. You'll see that I'll be talking about making sure the connections are made, structural connections, control connections. It also features as a topic in the next airworthiness revalidation package. We'll be talking about not necessarily the performing DI, but talking about annual inspectors who have the authority to sign people out for daily inspection and how they check that people are doing daily inspections properly or have been taught correctly. And as to CS in March, undercarriage door. During an Aerotow launch, a club member at the airfield noticed that the undercarriage door fell off and landed near the windsock. Now, the aircraft was radioed and it returned with a normal circuit and landing. And it was assumed that weeds or long grass got caught around the undercarriage door on the right-hand side and that the hinges failed. Now, there was mention that the door had been previously repaired a couple of years ago. However, I don't have any further information about whether the repair was to blame or whether it was just an overload of the hinges. A DG500, now we talked about the DG300 last time. This was DG500 in March, had a gear collapse with the undercarriage retracting on landing. Now there's no details whether this was pilot related and whether the handle was locked or not, or whether this was a problem with the undercarriage system. I understand it's got a fairly similar design as to the DG300 undercarriage. That should be a DG1000S, not a DG100S. This was in January this year. Now, this is the same aircraft that had an identical problem back in October 2022, where they found one of the bolts in one of the undercarriage springs had snapped and had fallen clear of the aircraft. At that time, AN 164 was updated to issue 4 to cover the issue. Now, there's 2 spring assemblies in the sailplane and there's 2 bolts per spring. At the time, there's total landings were 2,684. And we suspect the crack originated both times at the heat affected zone at the World. I believe it was a different bolt this time. Now, without being too critical, I understand that the aircraft is the club trainer. It's a popular aircraft, and the clubs don't want to have this out of the ground, on the ground or out of the air for any length of time. But the time they found the problem, they went and got the repair carried out, but they didn't inspect the other bolts. And I got a suspicion that some of these other bolts might be cracked back in 2022 and it wasn't detected. When you do find problems like this, as an example, let's say you find that the port aileron bell crank is cracked, it's a good idea to go and have a look at similar bell cranks like the starboard aileron bell crank to see if that's got a crack developing at the same time. I dare say if they'd inspected the other bolts in the assemblies, they might find a second one is cracked. It would be unusual to find only one cracked. An ASK 21 in February. It's not the bolt on the undercarriage spring. This is the hotelier wedge. Again, I did this at the last minute, unfortunately, seeing some of the typos now without me proof checking the slides. During the daily inspection, it was noticed that one of the hotelier wedges, i.e. the locking wedge for the ball on the air brake system, was not the same as the other wedges. However, when they opened the air brakes, the wedge would return to the fully locked position. Once the air brakes were closed and locked again, the wedge would move partially towards the open position. Now, this aircraft's been fitted with the Wedekind sleeves, and the wedge would not open to the fully unlocked position. The sleeve would prevent that. At the moment, it was suspected that the air brake needs adjusting and there's too much compression on the push rod and it's starting to force the wedge open when it over centres. Now, there's 2 photos there to show in the locked position on the bottom, the unlocked position on the bottom right, you can see that the wedge is fully locked. In the top left photo, when the air brakes are fully locked, you can see the wedge is partially open and is impacting on the end of the Wedekind sleeve. Now, hopefully, I'll get this video to work. Now, that's in the. Just watch the wedge, and you can see the wedge open when they fully lock. When the air brake unlocks, and you can see that with the vibration of the camera, there's a fair amount of force required to lock the air brakes. So we strongly suspect that the solution to this will be to adjust the push rod, make it slightly shorter, so there's less force required to do the over center, and that problem should go away. All right, I'll go this way. I did not mean to play that a second time. I was trying to get it going to the next slide. LS4A, in April, the cracked canopy support arm. Now, we've seen this before. It's another reoccurrence. The bar at the bottom's a cantilever, what you call a cantilever bar. It's not supported at the aft end, with repeated canopy opening and closing. I suspect a little bit of wind gusts that ends up cracking out at the welds. I suspect the cracks grow from the top corners of the welds and grow across the top of the bar. AN55 details this failure mode, and I can only recommend that people have a look at this area during the daily inspection and see if you can see under the instrument panel. But a close inspection in this area during the annual inspection is a good idea. Now, I'm not authorised to give out authoritative repair advice, but a suggestion from an engineer would be to perhaps weld a reinforcing strap over the top of that area and give it a little bit more tension relief over that region. April 7th, a geodiscus is a cracked elevator mounting pin. The pilot did the daily inspection and found that there was a little bit of free play in the trailing edge of the elevator, but it wasn't excessive. However, when he did the walk around prior to getting into the cockpit, he noticed that the tailplane had more play and was getting to what he considered excessive. When he removed the tailplane to investigate, the left-hand elevator mounting pin was broken and remained trapped in the tailplane. The stub of the pin remained in the fin torque tube, and it had broken through the mounting bolt hole through the centre. Now, the history of the aircraft, both of these pins were replaced in 2007 at 27 hours, so 2,727 hours. The aircraft's done nearly 6,000 hours now, so another 3,200 hours on top of that, roughly. I've got the pins on my desk at the moment. That's the broken one there, both pieces. I've drafted the defect report. I haven't finished it off. Both the pins were found to be undersized. The one that broke was the port pin. That was 9.94 millimeters in diameter. The starboard pin, now that was crack tested and I couldn't find evidence of any other cracking. That was on 9.95 millimeters. Now, there's two versions of the pins these days. The old version, the tolerances on the dimensions are from 9.98 to 9.99, roughly speaking. That's not quite the fit, but it's close enough for government work. So the pin that broke was between 0.04 and 0.05 of a millimetre in diameter, undersized. That gave it a little bit of free play in the fin torque tube, so that the elevator loads were being transferred through the securing bolt rather than the edges of the torque tube, and that ended up putting peak bending through the bolt hole, which is a stress raiser. Now, the new pins that are now manufactured at Champerth are a tighter fit. They're a much tighter fit in the hole. Now, this aircraft had the new pins fitted, and they've been reported that there's no free play now in the mounting through the fin torque tube. We'll get the results published out shortly. The geodiscus owners at the next annual inspection, if you do, please have a look at the pins, give them a wobble. If they have signs of free play in the fin torque tube, please remove them and get them crack tested. And it would be a good idea if you do find pins with free play to replace them. So that's free play in the torque tube in the fin. I'll also point out a couple of features. There were 4 cracks that I found. The original crack was crack 1 on the left-hand side. Interesting feature is that it grows underneath and much further than the crack that intercepts it, which is crack 4. You can see that there was water sitting in the bottom of the crack at various stages to enable it to trap a bit of dirt and corrode, which is what those brown marks are on the left-hand side. Crack number 2 is a much later, much more recent crack. It's almost a classic textbook image of a crack you would expect. Crack 1 actually starts inside the bore near the top. It looks like when these pins were fitted, they had some trouble getting to line up, and they've damaged the inside of the bore trying to force the pins to line up with the mounting holes. In the end, the last piece of metal that was holding this pin on was this raised shear lip on the right-hand side of the image. That's about 0.5 millimetre wide over that distance, that width of material. So there was literally something the strength of almost paper holding that pin together. Not very much material holding it together at all, such that the drive out to the launch point was what probably broke it. May, a DG300 found an corroded elevator push rod. Now this is the vertical push rod in the fin. They removed the rod end to check for free play as per the DG technical note, and they found that the bottom of the rod end had some visible rust. So they had a very small inspection camera which they were able to insert and inspect the inside of the push rod, and they found that it was corroded with water sitting in the bottom of the push rod. So they suppose at the moment that whilst there's a rubber bellows to seal the top of the fin, water has obviously gotten into the vertical push rod and has come in through the rod end check hole. There's a number of technical notes and even an AD for various models of aircraft for inspection of corrosion in the vertical push rod. I think the various GROB models have it. I know that there is something like that for the GROB 109. And this goes along with some of the corrosion problems we found in the horizontal push rod down to the elevator bell crank in the bottom of the fin. Some of these designs seem to be able to trap water very easily. If you go along to my safety seminar talk, you'll see that particularly for the East Coast, where there's been very wet summers over recent years, one of my fears is this very insidious corrosion happening around where there's water being trapped or has had ingress into the aircraft somewhere and is very slowly rusting out critical components in areas which are difficult to inspect. And that's it from me for tonight. I hope everyone found that useful, about an hour and a half. Any questions? All right, well, thank you, everybody. That's it for tonight. Once I've got the recording, we'll get this uploaded onto the YouTube channel, and I'll send an email around which will also cover the links for the OGN web pages that Steve showed us tonight. So thank you all for coming along.